Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're powered by CLNS Radio, where you can get the absolute best NBA playoff coverage this time of season. We've got Real GM Radio with Danny LaRue, which my guest today will be appearing on very soon. B-Ball Breakdown with Coach Nick. All of the Celtics Beat podcasts. We have a great crop of shows, and I would really appreciate it if you could rate, review, and subscribe to all of them, but particularly this show. That would be fantastic. We could really use some ratings and reviews because they help us move up in the iTunes standings, which gets more people to listen to the show. But first, I'm here with Jared Dubin from over at CBS Sports, Vice he writes for, as well as I do. You write for Fansided and The Step Back. Where else do you write, Jared? I feel like there are probably a couple other places.
I feel like I'm just going to take the name that Ian Levy bestowed upon me last year and just say I'm a prolific freelancer.
Yes.
I'm around.
And you know what else you are, Jared? You are a lawyer. You went to law school at Miami. And I have to ask you at the top here about what to me is probably the most incredible piece of defense work in a trial that I've ever seen in my life. So Alex Jones, the crazy InfoWars guy that kind of spouts conspiracy theories, and we'll just kind of leave it at that. And kind of, well, no, he like grumbles and grunts on air, and that's what he's famous for. He's in the middle of a custody battle right now, and in a deposition before the trial, the lawyer for his wife essentially asked, or was like asking all of these questions about the children and all of these like normal facts that you would expect a father to know. And his response was essentially, I can't remember these things. I had a big bowl of chili this morning I had a big bowl of chili for lunch. And then they asked him about it again today in trial, while he was on the stand in the middle of a very contentious, whatever. What do you call those, Jared? Like a contentious,
cross-examination?
Cross-examination? I don't know what it was exactly. He said the attorney asked him.
Being interviewed by the opposing counsel, it's a cross-examination.
Excellent. That is good to know. That's why we have you on the show. You are a lawyer. And the attorney asked, does chili affect your memory? And Jones's response, according to Charlie Warzel from BuzzFeed, was, big bowl of chili does. Sure does, yeah. So can you please rate for me on a scale of 1 to 10 what you think the effectiveness of a big bowl of chili defense is?
Well, I'll start by saying that from what I understand of the trial, I haven't been following it closely or really at all. It seems like it's a civil trial. I guess it's a custody battle, right?
It is 100% a custody battle, yes.
Okay, so it's a civil trial, so he's not asserting a defense here because he's not being charged with anything. He's just, explaining away an apparent inconsistency in his own case to have custody of his children because, he says that he's a caring father, which I suppose is, a piece of character evidence. And they're attempting to poke holes in that by showing that, he can't even remember things about his kids. And that's pretty good at disqualifying a witness's testimony. If they say they're a caring father and they can't remember things about their kids, that's pretty good right there. But
I mean, I've had big bowls of chili before, man, and they knock you out.
Yeah, I'm not a big chili eater. From what I understand, it's more likely to just make you tired than to zap your memory.
That's a good
Although
point.
I suppose as soon as you wake up from a nap, it's possible that you could be groggy enough that you have some short-term memory loss. But that seems more like, what was I doing before I went to sleep than what's my kid's name or where does he go to school? I don't know what he was asked about his kids that he said he couldn't remember, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is not likely to successfully explain away the fact that he didn't remember easy-to-remember information about his children.
See, to me, I mean, what you have said is obviously correct. But to me, I can't remember a more just incredible. And I don't even mean like in terms of positive. I just mean like in terms of just going beyond the possibility of credibility defense than I ate a big bowl of chili. What is your favorite? And it's not a defense. I understand that now that you explained it so well. But what is the best argument that you can remember reading about in law school that is similarly hilarious to I ate a big bowl of chili?
I'll say it wasn't even in law school. It was from the Donald Sterling trial where he had like the long rambling answer. And then at the end, the guy goes like, "Sir, the question was, is this your handwriting?" I can't remember exactly what he said, but he was rambling on about a whole bunch of stuff, something about a limo and like sex in a limo or some other kind of sex thing. And it turned out that like the question he was answering was, "Is this your handwriting?"
Yeah, that is just unbelievable. That Donald Sterling trial was filled with a lot of that random stuff. And that segues nicely into what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the NBA playoffs throughout the entirety of the show after that little interlude. But let's start with the Celtics because I feel like that's probably the biggest piece of surprise that we've seen so far in the NBA playoffs. I know that on this podcast last Friday, my good buddy Dieter Kurtenbach said that he thought the Bulls would win this series. I feel like that was a very minority opinion, and for good reason, given the fact that Boston was the number 1 seed, Chicago's the number 8 seed. This is a 2-0 series now, heading back to Chicago in favor of the Bulls. What do you attribute that to, and how surprised are you that the Celtics are down 2-0?
So I'll start by saying that, I agree that the Bulls winning the series was a minority opinion, but they also were like one of the hotter potential upset pick, or like trendy, I guess, potential upset picks heading into the playoffs. Because people were like, the Celtics are a fake 1 seed and all of the, they didn't play well down the stretch of the season and the Bulls look great down the stretch and all that kind of stuff. So even though it was a minority opinion, I think it was still one of the more popular upset picks. Yeah. I did not buy that. I think I said like maybe 10 minutes before game 1 started that I didn't see any way it would be a competitive series because the Bulls are just bad. Obviously, that looks pretty stupid. But so I would say I'm surprised that the Bulls are up 2-0. But the way that the Celtics are losing is not surprising to me at all, because it's the exact way you would think that this Celtics team would lose. They're getting hammered on the defensive glass. Robin Lopez is annihilating them. And they can't score because Isaiah is the only one that can do anything offensively. And if you were to identify a way that the Celtics were going to lose before the playoffs started, that is exactly what you would have said.
Yeah, that's definitely right. If you look at the Celtics' regular season defensive rebounding rate, it was not great. I think that is fair to say. They finished 27th in the NBA with a 75.3 defensive rebounding rate this season. This was definitely their weakness headed in the whole way. And the fact that the Bulls, who are an incredible offensive rebounding team, I believe that they were pretty close to the top of the NBA. For a while, they were number 1. I know that, but it looks like they finished number 4 in the NBA in offensive rebounding rate. But a lot of it does have to do with Robin Lopez. Robin Lopez is a really, really bad matchup for what the Celtics want to do. And just real quick, I want to point out, like, Robin Lopez has been one of the more underrated players in the NBA for a while now. I mean, the guy, now that we have more advanced stats telling us what he does defensively at the rim, he was among the league leaders this season in shots contested at the rim this season per game. He is a really good offensive rebounder, obviously. He is a guy that can step away and, occasionally knock down an 18-footer if you leave him wide open. He's a really good screen setter. There's a lot of skill there that kind of goes unnoticed, especially in today's NBA, all about pace and space. But he's kind of the perfect low-usage modern center for today's NBA. Having said that, I was surprised. I certainly am surprised that the Celtics are heading down here 0-2. You just look at what the Celtics were able to do throughout the course of the regular season. I guess that I figured the offense would not have as many issues with Chicago's defense as it has. I mean, the Celtics offense was in the top 10 in the NBA this season, but I guess that how do you feel about small guards is what this comes down to. I mean, like Isaiah Thomas, there's been a lot of hand-wringing about whether or not small guards are the most effective way to win in the NBA playoffs. We see it with Kyle Lowry year after year in Toronto. We see it with Isaiah Thomas this series. What do you attribute the Celtics' struggles to offensively right now?
I think a lot of it is the same struggle that has been going on throughout the season. It's not so much that Isaiah in particular struggles, although he hasn't been, up to the level that he was during the regular season. It's when he leaves the floor, they're a disaster. And like the minutes that he's been off the floor in this series, much like they were in the regular season, have been disastrous. They haven't been able to find good shots from anyone, anywhere. And that's untenable when you get into the playoffs. As far as smaller guards go, I think it's more of a situational thing to me than it is necessarily a blanket small guards can't win. Like, you look at Chris Paul. Chris Paul's a small guard. That dude's unbelievable in the playoffs. Like, he's had some high-profile, poor games, but in general, he's been terrific in the playoffs. And he's barely 6 foot. Like, I'm 6 foot, I'm taller than him. So I mean, that's obviously a little bit bigger than Isaiah is, but I don't think it's necessarily a blanket truth that small guards can't win in the playoffs. It's more to me, it's more about the Celtics not having really anyone other than Isaiah that's creating any offense for them right now.
Yeah. I mean, that's been a problem for them all season. Avery Bradley was really, really good early in the year offensively, but then got hurt, and it kind of seemed like it took a little bit of steam out of his game. Whenever Amir Johnson is on the floor, he's not really going to provide a whole lot in the way of offense. Jay Crowder and Marcus Smart aren't really creators necessarily offensively. You have to hope that Al Horford can bring something. I mean, this is why Al Horford was signed to be a bit of a difference maker in the playoffs, but it does seem like Horford has never... I know that he went to the third round with the Hawks that year during their 60-plus win season, but it wasn't really on his back either. What about Al Horford's game do you think does not necessarily translate as well to the playoffs as what we might anticipate?
I don't know. Again, it's the same thing. I don't necessarily know if it's that Al Horford can't translate to the playoffs. It's more that he has specific weaknesses, and he's wound up in matchups that players on the opposing team can exploit them. The last couple of years it's been against Tristan Thompson, and Al Horford teams tend to not be good at defensive rebounding. That was true in Atlanta. It's true in Boston. The 2 years in Atlanta, the last 2 years, they wound up facing the Cavs in the playoffs. That's who eliminated them in a sweep both times. Tristan Thompson hammered them on the boards both years. Kevin Love did it last year also, and Robin Lopez is doing it now. So it's the same thing each time, and that was true in the regular season for those teams too. But that didn't stop Al Horford from being an extremely positive contributor to those teams during the regular season. And I don't think it's necessarily stopping him from being a positive contributor to the Celtics in the playoffs either. It's just that he has a weakness that can be exploited, and when you go up against somebody that's really good at exploiting it, that's going to be a problem. And then on the other end, he wasn't like a true number one or even really number two option offensively this year. He was more of like a playmaking hub. He averaged a career high in assists, his lowest usage rate in like 4 or 5 years. It was more of, a playmaking role for him. And, the Bulls are just doing a really good job defensively right now. They're cutting off passing lanes. They're denying the ball. And, when you do that against a guy who's more of a passing big man, it's going to stick out that he's not really creating much offense on his own.
Yeah, you bring up Horford and just how integral he can be in terms of their ball movement just on offense, and you're seeing that for sure. I mean, they have a 106 offensive rating with him on the floor. They have like a 94 offensive rating without him on the floor in the 24 minutes that he hasn't played in the series. So it's very clear that when he is off the floor, they're having significant problems offensively. It's just the problem is that they need to find someone to pair with him that can really crash the glass and actually handle the defensive rebounding responsibilities that they need. But the catch-22 is they don't really have that guy. If you look at the way that their offensive rebounding kind of fluctuates with or without him on the floor, or their defensive rebounding, I'm sorry. He's actually got the best, or whenever he's on the floor, their team's defensive rebounding rate is still better than when any other big is on the floor for the Celtics. So there's not really a great option here, basically.
Yeah, I mean, so what do you think is the bigger issue for them? To you, is it more that, they need to figure out a way to get rebounds and, more stops? Or is it that they need another scorer? Because, like you said, the offense dies without, it really dies without Isaiah, but it also, lags badly without Horford. And then, when you play Horford as the lone big man, their rebounding suffers. So it's two big issues. I'm not sure which one is bigger. And, there's really nobody that's going to solve both. Boogie Cousins might have been that guy, but they apparently didn't want him because he was too crazy or something.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting way to segue, because I want to ask you about all of the problems that people are bringing up in terms of should they have gone all in or should they have just stood pat. But first, I would say that I think they're both equal issues. Like you said, this is not a simple, a simple equation here where they have an answer to really take care of the Bulls, because the Bulls are just a particularly bad matchup for them in terms of what they can do on the offensive glass and in terms of how they can get mismatches when Isaiah Thomas is on the floor with their bigger guards. The fact that they have really large guards, like even a Jaren Grant is 6'4", it can cause problems for Isaiah Thomas on offense. The fact that they have him and Michael Carter-Williams coming off the bench, and then you start Dwayne Wade and Jimmy Butler, and even Rondo still has probably 3 inches on Isaiah Thomas, and Rajon Rondo has been incredible in this series so far, especially in Game 2. So, I don't really think there's a simple answer, but let's kind of move into this idea of, do you think that they should have moved in at the trade deadline? Because at the time, I don't really think that we could have seen the Cavs having as many problems as they had late in the season. But having said that, do you think that they hit the 5% threshold at any point to win the NBA championship? 538 at one point had them at 7% to win an NBA championship. But to me, they never really hit that point. So do you think that they should have gone in at the deadline? And even with the, benefit of hindsight, say that we knew the Cavs were going to be worse down the stretch here and that they could get the number 1 seed, do you think that then they should have moved in at the deadline?
Yeah, it's tough, and we talked about this, I think, either the day of the deadline or a couple days after. Mm-hmm. It's so tough, and I said this on Twitter after Game 1 or Game 2. You have to find a balance between opening your championship window as long as possible and as wide as possible. Obviously, you want it to be open as wide as possible for as long as possible in an ideal world, but that's not necessarily always realistic. So far, it seems like the Celtics have leaned more towards keeping it open for as long as possible. That's what they're doing, keeping the powder dry, with all of their draft picks, and then always rumored to be making a big trade, and they haven't really made it yet. And that's fine. That's a perfectly fine strategy to pursue. You give yourselves enough shots, and maybe you turn into the Mavericks and you win it one of these years, like they won with Dirk in 2011.
Well, not only that, but you also wait out LeBron a little bit longer, too, by extending it longer into the future.
Right, and the more shots you get, the more chances you have to break through one year. But there's also something to be said for, taking advantage of an opportunity. And, I don't think that this quote-unquote opportunity in the East was as obvious at the deadline as it seems now. The Cavs defense at that point had been pretty bad for a month, but the Cavs playing pretty bad defense for a month in January and February is something that you look at certainly as a blip when you're actually in February. Looking back now, and it's the Cavs defense was a disaster for 3 months, that looks like a completely different opportunity, but there's no way to see into the future when you're in February. And I don't think that the Celtics could have reasonably known that their chances to win the East, that they would have gotten the number 1 seed because Cleveland was straight up bad over the second half of the year, or that they would look eminently beatable because their defense was so bad over the second half of the year. I'm not sure that they could have reasonably known that stuff at the deadline. If there was a deal there, like, it's also, we don't know what the price points were for these rumored deals, and we don't know how close they were. So it's hard to say that they definitely should have gone in and done something, but it certainly looks like they needed to do something to get themselves, to not be in this situation. I don't know if it necessarily needed to be that, the rumored George or Butler deals, but certainly they could have gotten someone to help rebound or play some defense. And you talk to people around the deadline, and there was a couple days after the deadline, there was like, the Celtics were close to something, but not what was rumored. And that's what somebody told me. And like, I don't really know what that means, but maybe it was something to get like a rebounder or something like that. And if that was it, then maybe they should have done that.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head there in terms of, I don't think that they should have made a big deal at the deadline. I think that they should have probably gone out and tried to find a deal for a Taj Gibson or something like that. I think that Taj would give them an interesting matchup for the Cavs because he would be able to move in pick and rolls. He'd be able to, at least handle some defensive rebounding responsibilities against Tristan Thompson. They'd be able to play a little bit smaller with him at the 5 consistently, or you could play like him and Horford together, I think, pretty regularly, given the fact that they both move pretty well. Horford's perimeter abilities on offense will mesh nicely with Taj Gibson's abilities defensively. They had enough picks in the stash to be able to get it done. It's not like, very clearly Chicago just really wanted Cameron Payne for some ungodly reason, but like, and
that worked out super well because he's not sitting on the bench in a suit.
Anyway, I agree, but like, I think that the bigger point here that people are kind of making is, should they have moved in on a star is the real discussion here. And I don't think they should have, because you bring up the idea of opening your window as wide as possible and as long as possible. I think that this upcoming summer, where they have not only the Nets pick that will be a top 4 pick guaranteed, possibly the number 1 overall pick, they have max cap space very easily by getting rid of Tyler Zeller's second year on his contract, and I believe they would have to renounce Kelly Olynyk, but I'm not positive on that with the way that the cap keeps kind of adjusting here until it comes down to a final figure. And they can easily still have the best offer on the table to go out and get a star even after getting those things. So they could reasonably leave this offseason, in my opinion, with something like Markelle Fultz, or, even say your lower end of that spectrum is Lonzo Ball or Jason Tatum. You could leave with a top 4 pick like that. You could leave with a Gordon Hayward, Paul Millsap, something like that can be 6'8", play the 4, and be a really good fit in the Brad Stevens system. And you can also still have the best offer on the table for a star like Paul George whenever he inevitably wants out of Indiana, or a Jimmy Butler if they decide to put Butler on the market again in Chicago. You could, there's no one convincing me that the Bulls are going to get a better offer than Jay Crowder, Marcus Smart, and the Nets 2018 pick. And that's a totally reasonable outcome that the Celtics could do and not think twice about, in my opinion. So, that goes into the idea of, if you go out and you end up with that this summer, you have Hayward for 4 years. You have this pick for potentially 8 years. You have whoever you trade for. If it's Jimmy Butler, 2 more years. If it's Paul George, you try and convince him to stay for more years on top of that. You're opening your window wider and longer by waiting, in my opinion, than by trying to push in against a LeBron James-led team that, we just kind of mentioned the idea of Al Horford struggling against Tristan Thompson in the playoffs the last few years. That issue's not going away for Boston because he moved to Boston. Like, Tristan Thompson still has an excellent matchup on Al Horford because he's going to be able to destroy the offensive glass. The Cavs still have an excellent matchup on the Celtics, in my opinion, because Isaiah Thomas just isn't really hideable in that series in any real fashion because all of the Cavs shooters are really, really big. So were you going to put them on Kyrie Irving? Like, that's just going to end incredibly poorly. So I don't really think their window was all that open this year, I guess. So I look at it from a perspective of they absolutely made the right decision, even knowing that the Cavs were going to be this problematic defensively going into the playoffs.
Yeah, it's also, this is something I think we mentioned on that post-deadline podcast also. I think Danny might just be doing this like he did in 2007, where, he waited for the draft because there was a possibility that, that year that he was going to get one or two and what he thought would be to get Durant either way. That's well documented. Mm-hmm. And I think he might just be doing the same thing this year. If they get one or two, they'll keep that pick and take Fultz or Ball, or, maybe he likes 3 also, but I feel like he has a number in mind where if he gets one of those picks, he'll keep it, and if not, he'll use it in one of those trades.
Yep. And honestly, if I was him, I would consider using it in a trade if it was a necessity. But like I said, even without that pick, I still think they have the best offer on the table to get a star. Like, that's
probably true. Yeah.
What team is going to beat Jay Crowder, Marcus Smart, and this is Jay Crowder with 3 more years on one of the best bargain contracts in the NBA. It's Marcus Smart, who is going to sign a relatively big deal, but it's going to be for 4 more years.
Well,
and
I should say here before you keep going, because obviously you're going to include one of the draft picks there. I'm not convinced that Crowder and Smart would be the guys they put in it. I'm
sure they would like to put in Avery Bradley.
Likely. Well, yeah, I was going to say I think Smart might be more likely to stick around than Bradley, just because Bradley gets paid next summer and is going to get.
Well, Bradley's unrestricted though, and I think that his value is considerably lower than Smart's for another team.
Right, and that's sort of where I was going. Like, they would rather keep Smart because I think they value him more because he gets paid less and later. But yeah, I would agree. Yes, that they have. I think the probably the best offer out there.
Yeah, I mean, what are other comparable offers? Like, the Lakers could theoretically offer Brandon Ingram and I guess, like, they're not going to offer both Ingram and Russell for a star. So, like, they could offer Ingram and Julius Randle, or Russell and Julius Randle, and, like, Jordan Clarkson and a pick maybe. But their picks are all in flux right now.
You don't think people are going to be interested in the Joakim Noah, Derrick Rose sign and trade?
I'm so sorry.
Billy Hernan Gomez package for. You don't think that's going to work?
I think the funniest thing I saw come across.
Let's not talk about that team though. I can't.
I know, but I just want to bring up one small point. The funniest thing I've seen across my timeline is Andrew Unterberger tweeted that the Knicks owe the 76ers their next 5 second-round picks, and they're all Sam Hinkie deals. It's amazing.
I should throw it out there that 2 of those picks were used to acquire Hernan Gomez, which worked out pretty well for them.
Yeah,
and they also have 3 picks in the second round in those years coming back to them. So they're only out 2 second rounders, and that's what it cost them to get Hernan Gomez. So, I mean, it is hilarious, but it's not as bad as it looks.
No, it's not as bad as it looks. That's totally fair. The fact that they got Hernan Gomez, who I think is going to be a really good rotation big for a while now, is very useful. But also they traded like 2 of those picks and got a return of Arnett Moultrie that they could keep Travis Ware on the roster, essentially.
Right. Instead of trading Quincy Acey for Mo Harkless at the time, which was a straight-up deal they were offered.
It's amazing. It's totally amazing. Let's move on, though. Let's talk about another series. Russell Westbrook goes for 50, 13, and 10 last night, I believe, 51, 13, and 10. And the Thunder lose because Russell Westbrook also goes 4 for 18 in the fourth quarter and takes 43 field goal attempts in the game. And it's not necessarily they lost because of that, but I think that it's okay to mention that Russell Westbrook played an absolutely incredible game, but also probably could have stood to be a bit more unselfish late. Takes 18 field goal attempts in the fourth quarter. From the 9-minute mark in the third quarter onward until the end of the game, he only assisted on 5 of the Thunder's points after assisting on 24 of the Thunder's points in the first 27 minutes of the game. 29 minutes of the... No, 27? Did I do math? 27. I did math right there, Jared. I'm good at math. You have this on 24 points in those first 29 or 27 minutes of the game. And, I think that it speaks to what his mentality is on this team. He thinks it's him against the world and doesn't seem to have a lot of trust in his teammates late. What do you do about this, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, so I want to throw it out there. This is something that I talked about with Danny on Real GM Radio that you mentioned earlier. He was incredible for the first, 30 minutes of the night, for the first 2.5 quarters. It was about as well as I've seen him play in his whole career. Like the balance of shoot and pass and, creation and laying back. He was ridiculous. He was 9 for 16 at that point or something, with 27 points and 10 assists, and he was incredible. And, then he came out, I think, with 4 minutes left in the third quarter, and Houston immediately went on a 9-0 run that cut their lead from, I think, 12-3.
Can I give you some hilarious numbers on that?
Yeah, I know they were minus 15 in the 7.5 minutes that he was off the court.
So yeah, in the 21 minutes that Russell Westbrook has been off the court in the 2 games against Houston so far, the Thunder have a 93.8 offensive rating and a 140.3 defensive rating. They have a net rating of minus 46.6 with Russell Westbrook off the floor in this series. That is unbelievable.
Look, I'm going to go out on a limb here. That's not good. You can't win like that.
And I picked Russell Westbrook as MVP this year, and I think we're seeing why in some ways. But I think that it's also worth mentioning, James Harden has been unbelievable in this series, and the Rockets have been unbelievable in this series, playing a very composed team game. But at the same time, Russ is just so much of what they have to do offensively that it is just so hard for me to try and even figure out what his how to value what he's done so far.
Yeah, so I want to say 2 things about this in general. First, I think it's okay to say that Westbrook was incredible for a while, and then he self-combusted, and that was the reason they were in the game, and that was the reason they lost the game, and not make some big grand take about what that really means about Westbrook and about his place in the league and the Thunder. It could just be a thing that happened, and that's where I'm at with it. And then, on the other side, I would be careful about using anything that happens in the postseason as evidence that anyone should or shouldn't be the MVP, because it's a regular season award.
I think that's fair.
To me, nothing that happens in the playoffs has really any bearing on the regular season. It's a completely different thing. So to me, I wouldn't say, this shows why Russ is the MVP or why Harden is the MVP or anything else. That's just me.
Well, I think that's totally fair for what it's worth. But on another level, these games just mean more in so many ways. They're playoff games, and they're coached at a higher level because you're going one-on-one against the team for multiple games, and you are trying to figure out a way to, totally knock out another team and end their season. I understand your point, but I also would point out back that we get a truer sense of what value is and what value isn't, I guess.
Yeah, I can see that, but that's more in terms of relative value in general. I don't think it tells you anything about who was the most valuable player during the regular season, if that makes sense.
That's fair. I guess it's more of a relative value thing in general that I'm equating as well. Let's just kind of talk rapid fire about some of the rest of these series here. Utah, LA. Rudy Gobert is now out for Game 3. The Clippers win Game 2 with Gobert out of the lineup. These games are at Utah, and Utah, I think, is going to be really excited to be in the playoffs for the first time in a while. It's going to get a nice home court boost. But do you think that they can do enough without Gobert to at least get one of these 2 games at home?
I think it's going to depend more on their offense than their defense. They really need to figure out a way to get George Hill and Gordon Hayward really untracked, because Chris Paul and Luke Ba-a-Moute and DeAndre Jordan are playing terrific defense, I think, through 2 games. And the Jazz can't be depending on Joe Johnson as like their main source of offense. It's worked. It worked pretty good in these first couple games. He's done a really nice job taking Blake Griffin off the dribble and Mo Spates off the dribble especially. But they need more from their top guys if they actually want to come away with a series win. And, it's really difficult to do that against Chris and Luke and DJ, but that's going to be the key for them to me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. On some level, I do think that missing Gobert really does hurt them on offense, because he is a really good screen setter. And he's able to create space against those excellent defenders, especially Chris Paul, who is so good at just staying on guys' hips when fighting through screens. But I think you're right. I think that the key for them is finding more consistent sources of offense beyond what Joe Johnson has given them so far.
Yeah, I mean, look, it seems overly simple, but when your best defensive player is out, and I think Hayward has done, Favors has done an admirable job of filling in that spot, but it became clear, I think, in both second halves that he doesn't have the stamina yet to really play, Gobert light for 36 minutes or whatever it is that he needs to play right now. So, their offense needs to step up.
Toronto, Milwaukee has been one of the more interesting series from an adjustment standpoint. I know that you wrote about adjustments earlier today at Vice. I'm still in the boat that I think Toronto pulls this out. I think Dwayne Casey did some really interesting things defensively to slow down Giannis in Game 2 that kind of show what I think Toronto's goal is going to be the rest of the way here. What do you think about the way that series is going to go?
Yeah, this is something that I mentioned on the Real GM radio as well, where we're going to learn a lot early in Game 3, I think, about whether the Raptors figured something out against the Milwaukee defense in Game 2 or whether they just had a few good possessions. Because if they figured something out, then I think that they're going to sort of cruise to a 5 or 6 game win. If they just had a few good possessions, then this series could go the distance, because it's been the way each team challenges the other with their defense and forces their offense to play has been really interesting to me. It's been one of the most fun things to watch early in the postseason. But the Milwaukee defense, it's so aggressive that if you figure out how your offense should be run against it, you can get really good shots. Yeah. And they sort of can't stop it, because they're not a defense that's going to adjust back. They're going to play that amped up, aggressive defense. That's what they're going to do. So if you figure something out, you're good to go. And if the Raptors did that, then I think they could, dispatch of them, not necessarily in 5, but maybe in 6. If they didn't, then I think we should get prepared to keep watching that series for 4 or 5 more games. Yeah.
The final series I want to talk about here is Washington-Atlanta. I get that people are excited about Golden State, but there's nothing really for me to talk about in that series. They're just better than Portland. San Antonio is just better than a Memphis team that is trotting out Wayne Selden as a starting guard right now. Cleveland, I know that both of those games have been close, but I'm not all overly enthused about talking about
if I have to talk about Indiana's defense anymore. If I have to talk about Indiana's defense anymore, I'm going to blow my brains out. Oh my God.
Yeah,
I wrote about that in the Vice piece that you mentioned also.
Yeah, I mean, what Nate McMillan's doing in that series is just atrocious, because he's not doing anything really. The series I do want to talk about, though, I've actually watched more of the Washington-Atlanta series than I think I've watched of any other series randomly, and it's really just interesting to me how Washington has been able to win games 1 and 2, first and foremost, by getting just unbelievable performance from John Wall. But second, they haven't necessarily gotten the incredible standout performances that I expected them to get from some of their role-playing guys. Markieff Morris and Otto Porter combined for 7 points in Game 2. Bojan Bogdanovic
Keith was really good in
He was great
Morris
in Game 1.
Was really good in Game 1.
Great in Game 1. But nonetheless, it seems like this Washington team is just so much better than Atlanta that, it doesn't really matter what Atlanta's going to do. They just don't have enough offense to keep up with the Wizards.
Yeah, the key to me basically was, after the first half of game one, Washington decided that they were going to, A, stop fouling, and B, run at every opportunity. Yeah. And since then, John Wall has basically just taken over, and it's become his series, and I don't really see a way that Atlanta can counter it. There's just not much they can do with the way their roster is situated and with the way they play. They're vulnerable to a guy like that sort of taking off and beating their defense before it has a chance to get set, and then in the half court using the way they play their defense against them. And that's what John Wall does best, and once he figures it out, it's really tough to stop unless you have other modes that you could go to.
They've basically played Dwight Howard off the floor. And Dwight, I think, has actually had a pretty underrated year in Atlanta. He's been very solid for them, and he's been a big part of why they had a top 4 defense in the NBA this year. But he has quickly turned from being one of the best pick-and-roll defenders in the NBA as a big man to, a guy that is just not playable in a series against John Wall.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and that's really disappointing. Jared, do you have anything else you want to talk about before we get out of here?
No, man, that's all. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep, you can follow Jared over at JADubin5 on Twitter.com. He writes over at Vice. Like he said, he wrote a big coaching adjustments thing over there on Thursday. He also writes at Fansided and over at CBS Sports for the NFL. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. Like I said, if you could please rate, review, and subscribe to the show, it would really be appreciated. It helps us move up the iTunes rankings and gets more people to listen to the show generally. So that's very useful. Like I said, we'll be back at some point next week. There hasn't been a ton of college basketball news since we talked on Wednesday to Coles Wicker. So we'll see. I might do some more NBA playoffs stuff on Monday. But keep it locked here, and I'm sure that I will have another podcast waiting in your podcast app on Monday morning / Sunday night. So until next time, we'll talk soon.